Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, you may at some stage have some problems to understand myself, as I am French. I'm trying my best to speak a proper English. So if you don't understand, just raise your hand and I will try to reformulate. And I'm Frédéric Thomas. I'm a farmer in central France. I've been involved in conservation agriculture for more than 30 years. I was a founder with a group of friends of BAS France, and that has been extended 10 years ago as BAS UK. It is the second time I'm coming to Groundswell. I was already there in 2019. I am amazed how big it has grown since 2019, so that's quite very good. And this afternoon, I'm going to try to take you around the kind of dilemma in between carbon and nitrogen. And you will see as we change the way we farm, we will have a big impact on the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. And I come from an area in France where the soil is very poor, very sandy on the top, and the bottom of the soil is waterlogging clay. So it's a very challenging area to do farming. It's probably why I got into conservation ag very early, because it was a challenging area. My colleague are still farming, but they're doing a little furrow every 12 meters in order to drain the water of the soil, because the water is not getting in the soil. Myself, I grow cover crop, and here we're drilling winter barley, and we try to be green on green, and that was in November, and that's a winter barley in February. When everything goes well, it's what happened. Obviously, as a farmer, I can admit that it doesn't go well 100% of the time. Sometimes it doesn't go the best. Another items I put on my farm is compost, and so now we got a kind of composting area on the farm. It's a way to bring more carbon into the system, and it's also a way to bring lime and to bring phosphorus and also trace element, because the sand holds no fertility at the beginning. Since about 10 years, we also reintroduce sheep into our system, because we have a heavy cover crop, and we almost produce more food in our cover crop in few months that the pasture can produce all year round. So we reorganize the sheep enterprise. So that's how a farm could look like in November, October, and we already have the sheep grazing, and they will be outside all winter, and we will be planting maize in spring. Then, when you improve your soil, you get better crop. And that's the difference between my maize and the maize of my neighbor. And the question is not the variety or the tools that we use to plant the maize. The question is the quality of soil that you built or didn't build. And the depth also of the soil. That's how my soil look like if you do a soil profile. And if you have good crops, you always have a better crop afterwards. You know, it's kind of a following chain. And that's the barley after my maize, and we usually follow maize by barley, direct drilling. And I start with no-till, cover crop, animals, but today pretty much a regenerative kind of point of view. And that I think that we were getting away from a kind of farming that we try with input to have control of everything, and also exploiting resources. And the main resources we have been exploiting through time was soil. And now we're more using the living things to guide a kind of agile way, and using as a source of energy the photosynthesis. That's how I look at the regenerative point of view. And once again, better soil bring better crop. And most of the time, the organic matter is in the subject, you know, in the background. And as I spent a lot of time digging holes and looking at soil organic matter, soil depths, earthworm, I can really tell. But then, when we think about organic matter, we think about carbon because it's dark. But in the organic matter, the second element you find is usually nitrogen. And when you move, I mean, almost every soil in the planet from one point of organic matter back or forth, well, you are capturing basically, if you increase 20 to 25 tons of carbon per point of organic matter. But then you need to link, because the CN ratio of the organic matter is around 10, between 8 and 12. You'll need to link approximately, for 10 carbon, you need 1 nitrogen atom. So this means if you have 25 tons of carbon for 1 point of organic matter, you need to immobilize in such a way 2,500 kilograms of nitrogen. So going down in organic matter is getting nitrogen free, but raising the organic matter will be immobilizing nitrogen to a kind of very strong way. So it's not only nitrogen, I will talk about that because the CN of the soil is nitrogen, but we could also talk about C on P, C on S and everything. And then looking at organic matter in the soil, it's just like a budget of a company. And the photosynthesis is in entry of the budget. So you need a lot of photosynthesis as much as possible. The crop, that depends on the crop you're growing, that depends on your yield. You need also cover crop. It's a way to add more organic matter and more roots and more exudate into the system. You can also recycle, organic matter from animals, from biodigester. And you can also have organic matter that I call outside the farm. But frankly speaking, most of the organic matter that come outside the farm come from the farm at the beginning, you know, because we are feeding the cities and the cities should return a part of the organic matter that they are producing. And then you need on the other side what's helped the organic matter to get out: burning, tillage, and moisture, that's mean irrigation. Also soil temperature. As at the moment we are experiencing high soil temperature. If the soil can stay moist, the mineralization will be higher, and fertilization that bring nitrogen that stimulate the mineralization. So at the end, we have to balance and be more on the photosynthesis side than the respiration side. But then, if we want to get fertility back, we need some kind of mineralization as well. We can't be all the time storing carbon, otherwise we will have not fertility to grow our crops. And at that stage, I like to have a very simple question. That's the same mix of crops, the same kind of soil, the same pots, but one of these containers has been sterilized by heat treatment. According to you, which container has been sterilized? Right or left? I don't know what you see. This one or this one closer to me? Raise your hand for this one. Raise your hand for the closer to me. Okay. People ask me the question in the lab. I answer the same thing as you. It's the contrary. Because if you want to have fertility, you need a certain level of aggression on the soil. And this aggression liberates N and other nutrients. The first farmers were using fires. And after a fire, it always grows better because you get the carbon off the system. And then the other farmers afterwards have used tillage. And the tillage is a way to get the carbon off the system and to get the nutrient. The question in between is how sustainable we are. Because if you try to get everything straight away, well, you will have nutrients, but you will lose your sustainability. But then if you are on the other side, well, you have less nutrient, you have a high sustainability, but the production will be low. That's how we will be in between. And by doing tillage, I mean, you will harm the water management, you will release the carbon, and you will get some nutrients. And it's amazing how much tillage do mineralization. That's a path of cultivator in Denmark in the middle of the summer. Well, the orchid grape grow better. Many people think it's because of the structure. No, it is because of mineralization. A friend of mine, Don Rakowski, I've looked in the United States how much carbon is released from the soil by the time you do some tillage. 5 hours, 25 hours. He compared that to a bottle of champagne. By the time you open a bottle of champagne or a sparkling wine, well, you release a lot of CO2. And then if you release the CO2, you get the fertility to you. So that is the good things about tillage. But then you have the bad things. Here you got labor is plowing, and semi-direct is direct drilling. And it's November, December, so there is a lot less nitrogen in the direct drilling. But then after only 64 mil of water, you see the nitrogen is going down. So you can have a lot, but then you're losing a lot. You can't keep it in your soil, as direct drilling will keep better the nitrogen into the system. Basically, in till soil, the fertility follow the water, okay? And then the first thing, so the first rule is to keep the soil in the field, okay? And I think most of you are aware of that if you are at Groundswell, so we will not talk too much about that. But when you look at rivers like that, is the river Aude in south of France getting in Mediterranean. Well, that's a lot of ground getting into the sea. And we really can do a big difference in terms of keeping the soil. Then the second thing in terms of fertility is to try to use as deep as possible. That is a corn, a maize, that is stuck at the bottom of the power arrow. But the field could go deeper, the roots could go deeper. Not on that field, the wheat field roots were at 2 meter, 2 meter 20 deep. Here we can see better on that one in Belgium. The roots of the sugar beet was 3 meter deep. Well, the risk of being dry is really on the other side. So we have to understand that we are not only farming areas, we are farming cubic things. And we have to exploit all the depths of our soil. Each time you added 1 centimeter used by your roots, you add in 130 tons of ground to your soil. And many plants, like maize, like wheat, can grow very easy, 2 meter, 2 meter 50 deep. Many crops can grow that deep. So for the people that got deep ground, it is important to go as deep as possible. Then we will leave the residue on top of the ground because it's conservation agriculture. There is good and bad, but most is good. And that's bring us a very good mulch to protect the soil, to feed the soil life. But then this mulch lacks chronically nitrogen. This mulch and the top of the ground is very, very low in nitrogen because you feed this top with carbon. How many of you have cattle or sheep in the farm? Okay. Well, if you feed sheep with straw or cattle with straw, well, they will survive. But if you put a bit of molasses and urea on top of that, I mean, you will balance the diet. And the soil is the same thing. We tend to feed the soil too much with straw. And the straw can be really stopping plants from growing. It's an accident in eastern France where they didn't pick up the straw on time, but you see the orchid rate didn't grow, not because of the slugs, but because of the low nitrogen, because of the too much carbon of the straw. And that is a small experiment that is done by a market gardener in France with red cabbages. And so he put fresh straw, and then composted straw, then loam. And you see gazon is loam from lawnmower. By the time you put a CN ratio, which is lower, the cabbages grow better. And then BRF is chopped wood, okay? So it's very high carbon. So that shock I mean, the nitrogen and stop the cabbages to grow. And by BRF, so the wood plus the turf, it grow better, and the compost, and it grow better. If you would have put DAP, I mean, the cabbages would have grown even better. You see how strong a little straw at the top of the soil can change the world for the plant you are starting. So that's why it is probably better, if you don't pick the straw, to leave the straw high, because you don't put it in contact of the soil earlier. And leaving the straw high, you don't take the nitrogen early into the seed bed. And that can help to grow cover crop. And that's the difference between a straw that has been cutting high and the straw that has been mulched in the ground. And that's the difference with the mustard. And the difference is just the early nitrogen the plant was able to do. Same field, same summer, same preceding crop, and no nitrogen application, just the height of the straw. And so that's why sometimes we have to review the way we harvest, and could be a good opportunity to look at shellbone and leave as much straw as possible up the ground. And this comes from Australia, and the other one comes from Scotland. And it's a way to not only save in combining, it's also a way to have more nitrogen available when you plant your future crop, because you don't have a lot of straw on the ground. Then, if you want the organic matter well digest, you will need some cover crop. We'll talk about that later, in order to balance the diet of the earthworm and the rest of the soil life. And more food you will have, and better quality of food you will have, and more it will come, and continuously better will be your soil life. It's not only the quantity of food, but it's the quality of food. So once again, we go to CN ratio as a diet, and then the continuity of food. So that means that your soil has got to be fed almost every day. It's not because you bring a big load every 2 years that it would be good for the soil life. It's got to be fed continuously. And the good thing, if the soil life is fed continuously and works well, we got a study in France that saw that the N from the earthworm is not getting in the soil, but it's getting almost all the way to the roots. So there is not free N in the soil. And the plants can feed in the earthworm gallery and get most of the nitrogen from that, so there is less risk of having loss of nitrogen. You understand myself so far? Okay. And so cover crops come in a run, because you replace roots still by roots, and photosynthesis will help to replace fuel, and nodules will bring nitrogen, and diversity will be brought by the cover crop to reduce agrochemical. And one of the problems of the cover crop is they are made also of C, carbon, and also of N. So this means that you can pick a lot of nitrogen, but then as you associated to that nitrogen a lot of carbon, well, the quantity of nitrogen you get straight away back is very low. Usually it's less than 20%. I mean, we can stay on that thing 20%. So the figure we got on average in France, it's 10 to 10 kilo N per ton of dry matter of cover crop, no more than that. So if you have a cover crop of 4 tons of dry matter, that's 30 N back. The rest is capitalized, will be given later, but the return on the future crop is lower most of the time, we think. So more biomass you have on cover crop, more will be your return and better impact you will have. And then we have to understand that usually during a normal year, there is a kind of a double peak of mineralization. And if your soil have a low fertility, your peak is very low. If your soil has a high fertility, your peak is high. But during the summer, like it was, I mean, almost yesterday, and it's still today here, I mean, the mineralization is low because it's dry. But when it will start raining, it will come again. And then, if that was a normal year, but there is no normal year, no more. And if you have a very wet and warm spring, the mineralization will be early. That was the year 18 for us, 2018. And we had no rain during the summer and no rain during the autumn. So the mineralization was very low. And this is the year 2022. I mean, it was dry in spring, dry in summer, and then it started to rain around the end of August, and then, I mean, it get warm until almost the end of November. So the mineralization were more of an autumn mineralization. So when you know that, there is no normal year. I mean, you have to have something growing all the time to pick up when the mineralization takes place. And if you do irrigation, you have mineralization during the summer because you change the weather. And on different trials, I mean, this one is quite old. It's from 1992, 2003, with cover crop, where we found that cover crop were good at picking nitrogen, but the area where we were losing the most nitrogen was where the cover crop didn't grow during the summer. Like, for example, there is here, there is pea, pois, blé, that's pea, wheat, so it's a summer break, but in the summer break, the wheat that come afterwards, I mean, can't get all the nitrogen that the pea leave in the soil. So you have a lot of leaching underneath the wheat that is growing. And well, we have a more recent figure in Brittany that shows the same thing. When you see that entrée hiver, that means just before the winter, well, there is field with 37N, it's filled with cover crop, and it's filled with oilseed rape, and filled with 120, 126. It's filled of wheat after maize, or wheat with no cover crop. So you see the impact of this summer break. We have to fix the nitrogen that is mineralized during the autumn. It's another example on potato. And those farmers, they had on average 115 kilograms of nitrogen at harvesting potato. And when we were planting wheat afterwards, that's a middle graph, they had 145. You see, one farmer was 200 and something nitrogen when we were planting the wheat after the potato. I mean, no wheat crop can take all this nitrogen. But by just putting a small cover crop in between, we kept all the nitrogen. So it's not because it is a short break. And I know you have shorter break than we have here. And it's not because you have a short break that you don't take the risk of losing nitrogen. So it is important to have cover crop to capture the mineralization. And usually, if there is no cover crop, you will have some leaching. And we measure in spring what is left over. But usually with cover crop, the nitrogen that mineralized from the soil will be connected to carbon into the plant. And then the legume will add nitrogen into the system. This means here, on one side, you got 130 nitrogen capitalized. On the other side, you have only 60 left. But the strange things in that story, that the one that capitalized the most nitrogen has the least nitrogen available. You want me to say it again, or you understood? The one that capitalized the most nitrogen always has the least nitrogen available for the future crop. It's a cover crop that we had many years ago, and now we got a method that is open, and we can look how much nitrogen is in the cover crop. I had 6.3 tons, and that means that I got 180 kilograms of nitrogen inside the cover crop, roots included. That gives you how much nitrogen I can get back on the crops, and that gives you also the number of energy if I feed it to animals, number of protein if I feed it to animals, number of cubic meter methane if I feed it to a biodigester, and how much it will impact my carbon and my organic matter. So we got the good equipment now to do so. Then we have to think deep soil. This comes from Denmark. So that's how nitrogen was in November. And because it's in English, it's easy for you to read. You see the winter wheat is 247 N, and the on cover is 261 N. So the French have a lot of nitrogen sometime in the field. The Danish have a lot of nitrogen. I doubt that the British have no nitrogen in the field sometime in the autumn. But where the cover crop is cruciferia or grass, well, the nitrogen is almost zero. I mean, 70 kilo nitrogen on 2 meter 50 is almost nothing. And if we get back to spring, that's in April, you see that the red curve, the nitrogen lift by the cruciferia that is starting to mineralize is all at the top of the soil. And you see that the nitrogen that was under the wheat and under the non-cover soil is starting to go down. Now, this graph shows soil to 2 meter 50. Imagine that your soil or your roots are going only 80 centimeters. This means that all the nitrogen that is underneath this 80 or meter is gone, is lost. It is why it is important to have good rooting, but that means also that the people, they are very shallow ground, they are sensitive to leaching more than the one that have big deep soil. And when we get into after harvest, you see that the nitrogen keep going down, but the spring wheat after the cover crop, this system has no losses at all. Even we were running with a high amount of nitrogen. And to show you how fast roots of cover crop can go deep in the soil, I took that picture the 20th of September in Switzerland, and the cover crop have 2 months. The handle of my spade, you can see the roots. They are 20, 40, 30 centimeter deep. And when we go to the bottom of my spade, 2 meter deep, you still can see the roots. The cover crop has only 2 months. So their plant can go deep, fast to grab all the fertility. And it's not only a question of nitrogen. You're bringing all kind of fertility and concentrate the rest of the fertility of the soil in the growing zone in the surface. So that will qualify your fertility on the top. And then the roots have exudate. And some legume, for example, I take the beans here, has a very acidic exudate. And the acidic exudate are able to dissolve some rocks like chalk and get some more nutrients into the system. And it is why beans or legume are quite interesting in calcareous soil. And those exudate will not only stimulate the soil life, but will help to increase the fertility when the fertility in the soil. Then, of course, you will help for the structure. And that's a 3 soil, which are very similar with cover crop, with no cover crop, and we minimum tillage and no cover crop and no well managed. So the last one I opened, the farmer seems like he's very sensitive to drought. Okay, the weather is dry, but his soil is very shallow, but is his problem. And also the roots is organizing the feeding network. Other roots will go inside and follow. And then after time, you get some return. But to show you how long could be the return, this is a little bit complicated. They apply in 1982 some N fertilizer as a form of urea in a research station in France. And this urea, the N was N15. So you could follow the molecule or N. So only 50% of the N apply got into the sugar beet and got into the wheat. The rest was not lost, but it got into the organic matters, in soil organic matter. And then after the years, as you can see in the graph, the organic matter slowly and slowly mineralize and give a little bit of nitrogen to the other crop, the following crops, and gave a little bit of nitrogen of the leaching and little bit of nitrogen of the one that go off the soil. But you see how long the fertilizer that you put in the soil can stay in the soil. The model shows that it will take 100 years to get rid of all the fertilizer apply, the material apply, in 1982. You imagine how long it takes. Then the cover crops are good to bring nitrogen, and we need them for that. And it could be a good supply. And the best result we had in France, because we have a kind of competition in between ourselves. It's a friend, Jean Hameau, and with the Facility and beans, he got to 351 kilograms of nitrogen. Okay, 300 something. We don't have to be that precise. So that's made almost a ton of ammonium nitrate per hectare in one cover crop. That's not bad, especially when you were at the price of ammonium nitrate or urea in 22. And then if you do good for a few years, you will develop the fertility cycle. And when you look at fields, it's easy to see the one that has worked properly and the return is coming. And that is a revolving of all the fertility all the time. And what helped this revolution of this fertility is the photosynthesis that feed the system with energy. And then, even if you are in a good growing area, your yield should be improved. And there is sometimes a little downward at the beginning, but that is nitrogen management, but then the yield is better. And if you supply even more nitrogen when the yields start to go better, you can't recover because it's many other functions of the soil that get the soil better. You manage better the water, better the nutrients, you get a better soil life, and basically your field is better. Most of the cover crop at the beginning, they lack of fertility to grow. That's doubling nitrogen in the field. And the farmer told me the cover crop doesn't grow because it's dry. No, there is a lack of fertility. This is another one that he reduced drastically the nitrogen application on his wheat while his cover crop didn't grow. Where he has his compost pile the year after, the year before, while the cover crop did grow. So, and this is a farmer that has a lot of leaching. And when I got to the farm, I said, I'm pretty much sure that you're losing a lot of nitrogen. And he told me, no, you must be exaggerating, Mr. Thomas. I said, well, maybe, but plant cover crop, and you will see in November what happened. That's the cover crop he had in November. 250 kilogram nitrogen in the mustard. And so we had a big problem. He couldn't see the farm from the road. From the road, he couldn't see the road from the farm, so we had to find a solution. So we smashed the cover crop down that evening. And then if you have some manure, because usually we kind of lack of fertility when we put the cover crop, it's a good way to put the manure at that time. And some research we had in Brittany and Normandy showed that we can apply even fertilizer on cover crop. It was hot stuff, but that helped to secure the application of manure on growing cover crop. It has to be growing cover crop. And if you look at how animal waste, then there is a 48 on the graph closer to me here, and the one further on the other side. There is 48 animal waste. And you see that there is some giving nitrogen, and there is some taking nitrogen when you put them into the soil. It depends on the CN ratio of the animal waste you put in the soil. If there is high C in the animal waste, well, you're feeding the soil with too much carbon. So the soil will grab nitrogen, the soil life will grab nitrogen to decompose the animal waste. So you're burning a manure thinking that you will enrich the fertility for the next crop, but you don't have the fertility you're expecting because the soil life will grab the fertility. So by knowing it is very difficult to know how much you get from an animal waste, it is better to put it early on, feed your soil life, and use a cover crop in order to manage the difference, and that will increase the auto-fertility for the next crop in the future. So it's why I like better to do that. One more thing, the further one, the closer one to me here, you see it's 17 compost together, product that has been composted. It's very flat, okay? Because when you compost, well, usually it turns hot. And when we look at different figures from compost, this comes from Switzerland, you see between muck and compost, you go in P from 1 to 2. So you have a concentration on P. That it means that the stack has reduced half. Okay? If you look at the K, well, the stack has reduced half and the K has reduced. So that means we lost a lot of K. The K is not connected to carbon. The K will leak straight away. And when we look at N, organic N, you got a little bit more in a stack that is half less. So that means that we have lost N. And if we look at the carbon, well, we have less in a stack that is half size, and we lost a lot of carbon in the story. And then I made a little graph applying compost and applying muck straight from the barn, 30 ton or 15 ton, and you see we're losing N, we're losing K, but we're losing a lot of carbon. If you apply the 30 ton of muck, you're applying 5.2 tons of carbon. If you apply 15 tons of compost, you're applying only 1.5 tons of carbon. And if you want to feed your soil life good carbon, but this carbon is gone by trying to get the heap of compost hot, and you are losing good food for your soil, basically. That's why I like to put also the muck in a good cover crop in the fall. And then we'll help to bring better soil. And usually, the entrance will be the non-link carbon, what we call the carbon labile, and that help for the soil. And believe it or not, this is a cover crop I had last year, the 15th of October on the farm, which has been the hottest and driest year ever. I planted that the 7th of July. I mean, I go back home, harvesting my winter barley at the moment on the farm. So I like to say thanks to my friends, because I'm going to have an early harvest without grease and itching. So that's fine. And I'll be talking to you. But 7th, next Monday, probably will be planting cover crop, you know. But it was dry and hot, 40 degrees. I planted the cover crop, and my cover crop survived. And at the 15th of October, that's the biomass we had. And the 15th of November, we had 10 tons of biomass. One of the driest and hottest year ever. And why that happened, if we do analysis of the soil, I am quite high now in organic matter, and quite high if you look at the yellow part in free organic matter, the one that feeds the soil life, because it's not only organic matter. And if I look here, that will be coming, I got 128 N inside the living part of my organic matter. 128 kilograms of nitrogen in the living part of the organic matter. And then if you look at the blue sign, I got 223 kilograms potential of mineralization of my soil. So my soil can supply that. And I had a great cover crop last year because I have a great fertility and water management. My colleague that didn't have the return that I had, well, I put cover crop. I got 20 minutes. Okay, so we're in gears. So it's why when your soil is better, your fertility revolves better, you can manage better. Remember then, all the plants that we grow are made 45% carbon. 40 to 45% carbon. The biggest food of our plant is carbon. Nitrogen, I talk a lot about nitrogen. Nitrogen is from 4% to 0.1% when you go to wood, from 4 to 0.1, okay? But 43, 42, 44, 45% carbon in every dry matter of a plant. Whether it's wood, whether it's wheat, whether it's grain, that's what you will have. So we are entering a lot of carbon into the system. It will drastically change also how we manage water. And by here we had a rain simulator that really show that. But what it is interesting, by modifying the way we manage water it's not only water for the plant. We always think it's water for the plant. No, it's water for the soil life. And if your soil stays fresh and there is water, the soil life will keep, eating the residue and giving you the fertility back. That's why it is important to keep a fresh and water soil. And if I look at the field a few years ago, mice, I'm sorry because I grow quite a lot of mice, you see how much mulch I had. I say I had because now with the sheep I have less mulch. You know, you can't win on both worlds. And then I save a lot of water, but then I can ask myself, or I can ask yourself, where does the carbon come from the photosynthesis? Where the carbon come from? From the air. That's what we all learn in school. And it's probably true. That's a conventional carbon cycle. And when the soil is releasing carbon, you get nutrient, okay? But if your soil is alive, just like you and me, if your soil is alive, during your crop is releasing carbon. Okay, earthworm emit carbon, bacteria emit carbon, mycorrhizae emit carbon, okay? And this carbon is a very heavy gas and is recycled straight away. So it is true in mice, it is true in cover crop, it is true in oilseed rape field, it is true in your wheat field as well. And this carbon is a lot more easy to get than the carbon from the air. Remember, the first food of the plant is carbon. And so here, by the time you release the carbon, you get nitrogen, P, and stuff like that. So it's what we call synchrony. By doing so, you synchronize the cycle of carbon and the cycle of nitrogen. It is very odd stuff. And that explains why plants grow better. And then we are, when we go in regenerative agriculture, working in different world. The world from here or from there, which is the same one, each thing that conventional farming does, they do it to have a lot of fertility when we plant our crops. And the risk of that is to lose a lot of fertility by leaching or by erosion. And if we follow the regenerative point that I've been through, we keep the fertility. We are very good at that. But we link so much of fertility with the carbon, then the risk is not having enough. You know, we can get from one world to the other. I like better to be on a green world because it's manageable, because what is lost is lost. So this means that we have to be green as much as possible. I'm not talking about the drill, the color of the drill and the color of the tractor, okay? But green as much as possible. But if you kill your cover crop when you're planting, usually the crop don't go as well as it should do, because all the nitrogen and fertility is in the cover crop, is not in the soil. That's explained why there is a lot of deception. And we have had so much lack of nitrogen doing that way. Good earthworm, good cover crop, good machinery, and we lack of nitrogen at the beginning and fertility. And so if I come back with my little graph, and that spring barley needs, February, you kill the cover crop, the soil will give you 70 kilograms. So you put 110 kilograms on the spring barley. That's what you will get from the cover crop. Not a lot, 20, 30 kilograms. So you can put a little bit less because you had a cover crop before your spring barley. But when you plant and your spring barley emerge, because you have to decompose the roots, the level of fertility available is very, very low and not enough to start spring barley. So you have to move the fertility onward. Remember that cover crop, I had 160 kilograms. I had all that. I had 38 kilograms into the soil, but I didn't see that I have only 26 kilograms on the surface of the soil. I have 200 kilograms nitrogen, all right, but I have only 26 available. Here is another example. We fertilize the cover crop. I have only 20 available in November. Here it's in Belgium. after wheat, it could be in England because of the weather, 124 kilograms of nitrogen, and with a small cover crop, only 24. Here it's in North America with a living mulch on maize. Well, when the living mulch starts again, the level of nitrogen go down. So inevitably, you are short of nitrogen when you plant on green. But then you delay the time when the nitrogen come back. And usually you are more organized and come back at a better time. So it's reorganized better. So to change the rules, the first thing is to move the rotation around. Here, I put the figures in English here. You got, so there is a plow, the mini-till, and the direct drilling, I put DD. So that's the yield for the wheat in monoculture wheat, 82, 75, 81. 8.1 ton. But by the time you plant the wheat, after P, not wheat, plow, it's 89. You got a little bit of extra. Mini-till, you got 92 instead of 7.5. You got 1.7 ton extra. And when you go direct drilling wheat on P instead of on stubble of wheat, you go to 9.6 ton instead of being to 8.1 ton. So this means by changing the preceding crop, you can really change the environment you have in front of your crop first. But beans, peas, legume, when you harvest the seed, it doesn't bring nitrogen to your system. It's a measurement that has been done in organic field. They compare how much nitrogen you get from a beans. We harvest the seed compared to a clover. Well, a cover crop brings nitrogen, but not a cover crop, not a crop with seeds, because you harvest the seed and you take the nitrogen out. And the legume, they need a lot of nitrogen to grow. That is a P of 5 tons of seed harvested on P, winter P, 5 tons. The benefit nitrogen is only 39 kilograms of nitrogen because you exported all the nitrogen with the seed. And the total budget of nitrogen is 385. So legume need a lot of nitrogen, is why they are legume. But they use nitrogen from the soil, and then they bring nitrogen back. So you need strong soil for legume. So we can shuffle the rotation. For example, pea or beans, go to OSR, and then you go to wheat. And then you can go to barley, you can move like that, or to corn on ourselves. And I'm using an experiment of Jim Bullock, what was the former president of BAS. Unfortunately, he passed away. But he tried that. That's oilseed rape on beans. And no slug pellets, no herbicide. And that's the same fields with straw and slug pellets and grass herbicide. And he made one great yield on the beans. And what I do remember, that's the yield of wheat he made after this rotation, because he planted wheat after the oilseed rape. And he told me that he made the best wheat of his career after this succession. He won 12.5 tons of wheat. I mean, it was quite fabulous. By changing the rotation and shuffling, the Swiss has worked quite well on that. And they managed in 10 years to really increase the nitrogen efficiency. You need a little bit of time and reduce the amount of nitrogen they were putting on average on the farm by even increasing the yield. But it takes time, okay? And another thing you have to change, I like to plant big seed. Because when you are going no-till, I mean, the seed is a germ, and the seed is also a rucksack of nutrients. So it's a better nutrition of your germ. So it's two types of seed of corn. One is 400 grams per 1,000, and the other one is 200 grams per 1,000. And I grew them on sand, but sand without nutrients, and you can really see a difference. And we look at the difference with beans as well. Big beans give bigger plants at the beginning. Small beans give smaller plants. We even tried it on garlic. Well, 5, 10, okay, on garlic. It works as well. So then, after we got the big seed, we can shuffle the rotation a bit. Well, if we plant in green, we usually have to bring fertility at the beginning. And this would be, if you want to succeed more in managing the fertility, usually it's where we have to place the fertility. And the last place we are looking at the moment is how to stimulate the starting. And you all have seen that in your field. When there is a little group of seed, it grows always better. That the root exudate, that the plants do together and stimulate the mineralization, but then when the mineralization has mineralized everything in the small area, the plants get in strong competition. So how we can have this priming effect, scattered, and by planting the plant where they are. So if I summarize, well, the mineralization and what you have to compensate with N. Well, if you have sandy soil, we will have a lot of mineralization, and clay and chalk will be less. If you're hot, you have more mineralization than when you are cold. When you're humid, you are more mineralization when you're dry. But most of the time, you can be dry and cold and hot and humid. And if you plow and mix tillage, do more mineralization, and direct drilling with cover crop is less mineralization. And then if you apply organic, chicken muck give a lot of mineralization, and when you go to wood chip, you have more carbon and less available nitrogen. And then if you go to cover crop, legume will mineralize and give more nitrogen than if you go grasses on the other side. This means, and then there is a chemistry you use. Sulfate and nitrates will stimulate mineralization, and marl will low mineralization. This means you got to know where you are and applying the right thing to have the amount of N you need for the plant when the plant grows, okay? And sometimes, well, you have to shuffle in the middle of all that to have things right. I have a guy, he put wood chips because he was a no-tiller, and his cover crop was oats, and he had a chalky ground on a cold and dry area. Well, by going no-till, he reduced his yield in half. It was just a question of nitrogen. By the time we took the wood chips out and starting to bring more nitrogen, well, we got the yield back. And then carbon sequestration will need N. In that, they are linked together. And each time you're adding carbon, you immobilize N. I like to stay on that. Then, usually, you are low, but when the mineralization takes place, you're getting the nitrogen a little bit. So most of the time, we got to anticipate the application of nitrogen, because this nitrogen is not only feeding the crop, but is also first feeding the soil life, and also feeding all the soil life that want to get an end on the carbon that you left in the field. So a lot of nitrogen we apply will be immobilized. That's why we had some trials in central France where since 1999, we apply nitrogen only at once, quite early. So it's out of the regulation, okay, one time. But like that, we get better at the right time because we feed the soil with nitrogen, and not only the plant, grab the nitrogen and give the nitrogen back slowly afterwards. But you need to have a soil running well for that and have a lot of carbon. We can grow mixes with legume. Then we succeed with companion plants on OSR, and we can reduce a little bit the nitrogen that we apply and have good result with that. And that is something quite interesting because it's increased the nitrogen you're bringing into the system. And then after legume, after the oilseed rape, you can have a legume that's following and that can bring nitrogen also into the system. So you're always feeding your soil with a little bit of biomass that is low in nitrogen. So when you bring straw, it will be easier fed, easier integrated. We can also think about permanent cover crop. It seems to be, in theory, a very good system, but it's not because you're having legume that you're having a lot of free nitrogen. This is where the wheat is low, is where the legume, the clover, has been killed in March. If you kill the legume late, okay, it will take a lot of nitrogen to itself and compete very strongly with the wheat. Okay, it's not free nitrogen. 5 minutes. And then, with conservation agriculture, you will cycle better the rest of the nutrients, but you need all the nutrients. And more you will produce, more nutrients you will need, and more nutrients you will export. And usually, I mean, we can ease the nutrient flux, but we sometimes speed up the appearance of deficiencies because we store the nutrients with carbon. And this means that you have to be very careful. It's not only nitrogen story, but look at your leaves sometime or do some analysis to see where you are. And one of the nutrients that causing problem is sulfur, that following the nitrogen. Because I took the figures that sulfur emitted by United Kingdom, it's the same thing in France. I mean, pollution was bringing sulfur in the 80s. Now there is no more sulfur pollution, and now we have to bring sulfur. And cruciferia or legume, they like a lot of sulfur. And I mean, this guy is not a very tall guy. He's 1.70 meters, but that's how high was his P after sulfur application. And then I'm going to finish with that. There is a big difference between cereal farmer and animal farmer. And cereal farmer are exporting a lot of fertility out of their fields because you export the grain. Sometimes you export the root. And animal farmer seems that they're exporting a lot, but they move the fertility across the farm. And usually in trace element, animal farmer are a lot more better trace element organization of the soil. But animals are not bringing fertility. The animals are concentrating and moving fertility. They are not bringing fertility. So it's because you feed the animals the fertility that the fertility is getting back into your soil. And there is a lot of trace element in the system. And I'm going to finish with those two slides that are a little bit complicated to explain you why is it important to have animals in regenerative agriculture. At the moment, we hear a lot of things about the cows and the sheep. We should get rid of them because they are spoiling the planet. I don't know if you heard of that. And it's a big buzz in France at the moment. We got to get rid of all the cows. But if you feed the soil with high carbon, you will have a lot of soil life that will get on that carbon and feed themselves. But this soil life will need nitrogen. And the nitrogen they find it in the soil, in the organic matter in the soil. So this means that you are withdrawing with the soil life carbon in the atmosphere. Okay, that's a carbon store in the biomass you feed the soil. And then this soil life is taking nitrogen from the soil organic matter to get nitrogen to balance the diet. And so they're throwing in the air an extra organic matter that comes from the soil. That's why if you're feeding the soil with too heavy straw, you will not increase the organic matter of your soil. You understand? And we are short on carbon most of the time. And if we put the animals into the system, well, the animals will emit a lot of carbon, a little bit of methane, that's all right. But they will prepare the diet of the soil, and the soil will not be negative too much in nitrogen. So the bugs, the soil life that will digest the residue of the animals, they will not have to eat the organic matter already stored in the soil to get nitrogen out of it. So it is why pastures, sequestrate carbon, active pastures. But we got to say to some people, they look only at the cows, that the only way to have good pastures is to have someone grazing the pastures. And if you put everything together, well, the cycle are working a lot better. Well, I'm going to stop here because I'm running a little bit out of time, but I'm at the end of my presentation. This means we have to increase the production of biomass to feed and qualify the production of the biomass. That's the only way we will have better soil. So I'd like to thank you to have been here this afternoon and listen at me, and I hope it has been very useful, and we can be ready for a couple, 3 questions. Thank you. Raise your hand if you, or maybe, yeah, there's one question over there.
Okay, thank you for a great presentation. My name is Else from Norway, and I was wondering, when you have these uneven fields with fertilities, how do you manage to get it more even? Because what it seems like is that the cover crops don't grow as good in the bad fertility, but how do you get it better in those areas?
I'm sorry.
Are you saying where you have fields that have poorer fertility?
Yeah, when you have fields that have good and bad fertility in the same field, so how do you make it more even?
How do you make it more even? So you've got good and bad fertility in one field, how do you even it out?
Fantastic questions. I mean, I'm not going to take an hour, but it's going to take a little bit of time. First things, with cover crop, like animals, you will not create fertility with cover crop, whether you have it or you don't have it. There are only 2 elements you enter with cover crop on top of what is already in your field, maybe in the depths of your field, is carbon. Carbon, a lot of carbon, which is energy and organic matter. And the second thing you enter in your system is nitrogen, if you are low in nitrogen, okay? You will not enter phosphorus if you don't have phosphorus in your soil. You will not enter copper if you are short in copper. You will not invent bore. You will not invent sulfur, okay? If there is some in the rock, if there is some in the reserve of the soil, you will have it, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing, by mixing cover crops together, if we look only at the nitrogen and carbon things, where you have a lot of for example, overlapping, you are rich in nitrogen. In the mix, the cruciferia will grow better, you know, and the grass will grow better. When you are short in nitrogen, okay, the legume will grow better. Okay, they will overgrow the rest. So this means, I like the low-tech system when it's possible. This means at the end of the year, you will have a level nitrogen rate in the soil all over your field, even it was very uneven before, and you will have a level nitrogen content in the biomass of your cover crop with an heterogeneous cover crop, with a cover crop that is a mix of different things, but don't look flat, okay? But it will be balanced. It is also why I like to put manure in a cover crop at that time, because frankly talking, you know, spreading manure, I mean, it's not flat, and the product you get from one part or the other part of your stubble, it's not flat. So like that, you will level everything like that. And then, if you put the animal into the system, because field with the other element are not level, the animal are injecting themselves elements. But by the time it goes through the animals, it can take a day or a day and a half. So the animals are carrying the fertility. So they are moving the fertility across your system. So they will be helping you to level the fertility a little bit across your fields, but they will not invent fertility. It was a quick answer, but that's how. And then If you lack of fertility, you will have to add fertility. There is no dreaming things, you know. If you lack of fertility, you will have to add the element because it will stop growing because you have no sulfur. It will stop growing because you have no potassium. It will stop growing because you are short on boron or whatsoever. Okay? You will not invent elements.
I'm ever so sorry, but we are going to be out of time because we have another session in here in 15 minutes. But perhaps people could, if they want, come speak individually if they have a question, if that's all right. Thank you ever so much for your...
Thank you.